Yeah.
Ever think about like how much strength it takes to face just absolute fear? I
Yeah.
mean, the kind that would make most people just freeze, you
Yeah.
know? Well, that's what we're looking at today. It's the story of Crystal Searles,
Oh, yeah.
this girl who survived this horrible attack
Mm,
on New Year's Eve, 1999, and then went on to show like incredible courage
right.
after going through, well, unimaginable trauma.
Yeah, it's a story that really like cuts to the core of what human resilience is all about. And it's even more powerful when you think about, Crystal's life before that night.
Exactly, because it's not just surviving one really scary event.
Right.
The Wondery podcast, 48 Classics, Crystal's Courage, really paints this picture of this young girl who's already dealing with a lot, like way more than she should at her age,
Hmm.
living with a family that's struggling with drug addiction.
And that's what makes Crystal's story so interesting. She had to grow up so fast. She was taking care of her younger sisters when she was still just a kid herself. You can't even imagine like how much responsibility she must have felt.
So we start with this family in crisis,
Mm.
and then on New Year's Eve 1999, Crystal is staying with family friends
Yeah.
in Del Rio, Texas.
Right.
And everything changes. Like her whole world is shattered.
The episode does a really chilling job of describing that scene. You've got the Harris home. It's isolated,
Yeah.
off in the middle of nowhere. That becomes the setting for this awful, awful crime.
It's scary.
Crystal wakes up and finds her friend, 13-year-old Katie Harris, has been murdered.
Oh my God.
And Crystal herself is attacked. Her throat was slashed by an intruder.
It's hard to even imagine the terror she must have felt. But somehow, I mean, think about it. Despite her injuries, Crystal finds the strength to get out of that bedroom, walk to a neighbor's house, and get help.
What's amazing is that even in that moment, pure terror, Crystal's survival instincts just take over.
Right.
It's a level of inner strength that's almost impossible to understand, especially for a kid.
And her bravery doesn't stop there. While she's still in the hospital, Crystal identifies her attacker from a photo lineup,
Wow.
Tommy Lynn Sells, a man known to the Harris family
Okay.
and who had a history of violence.
That ID is so important to the investigation.
Yeah.
When they arrest Sells, he confesses not only to Katie's murder and Crystal's attack, but also to a bunch of other murders all over the country.
Really?
And that changes the whole case.
Yeah.
Suddenly they see this pattern of predatory behavior, and it exposes Sells as, well, a serial killer.
So Crystal's story just gets even more complex. I mean, she's not just a survivor of some random, act of violence. She was the target of a calculated, cold-blooded killer.
Exactly. And that adds a whole new level to her trauma. It's not just the physical and emotional scars of the attack, but the fact that she was targeted specifically by someone who preyed on vulnerable people.
And knowing that, Crystal, at just 11 years old, has to face Sells in court.
Oh, God.
She's forced to relive that horrible night and testify against him.
It's incredible. Think about the courage it takes for a young girl to actually confront her attacker,
Right.
to speak her truth in such a public and scary setting.
And her testimony ends up being crucial in getting Sells convicted, which must have brought some relief and, well, a feeling of closure.
Yeah.
But as the episode goes on to say, the road to healing, well, it's far from over.
Right.
The trauma from that night leaves deep scars on Crystal and her family.
What's really interesting here is that the episode goes into detail about like the different ways the trauma affected Crystal. She has nightmares, anxieties, this deep fear that's just there all the time.
Yeah, it makes you think about how surviving the attack was just the start of another fight. A fight inside her against like the mental and emotional damage that never really went away.
Exactly. The podcast really highlights these invisible scars of trauma and how long-lasting the impact can be on a kid. Makes you think about the kind of support they need to deal with something this big, especially when their home life was already tough.
Because don't forget, Crystal was already dealing with her parents' drug addiction before the attack. She was the caregiver for her little sisters. Like she was forced to be an adult way too soon.
It's almost like she was robbed of her childhood twice. First by her parents' problems, and then by what Sells did. It's hard to think about how all of that must have affected her growing up.
Yeah. It makes you see how vulnerable kids are in these situations. They need stability, security to really thrive. And when they don't have that, well, the results can be devastating.
And what's amazing is that Crystal is even more resilient because of it. After everything she went through, she not only survived, she actually found a way to heal, to forgive.
It wasn't an easy road, though, right?
Yeah.
How do you even begin to process something like that?
This episode doesn't try to sugarcoat how hard Crystal's journey was. We hear about her anger, her fear of the dark, how hard it was to trust people, but we also see her fighting to get her life back, to find some joy, some purpose, even with all that pain she carries.
Yeah. One of the things that really stands out about Crystal is her ability to forgive. She forgives her father for his mistakes, but she even finds a way to understand Tommy Lynn Sells.
Forgiveness, in this case, it's shown as something deeply personal, you know? It's a way for Crystal to let go of the bitterness and anger that were trapping her. It's not saying what Sells did was okay, but finding a way to move forward without being stuck in the past.
That's a really powerful message. It says that forgiveness can make you stronger, like a way to get your power back, even when you've been hurt so badly.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that Crystal's forgiveness wasn't like a sudden light bulb moment. It was this It just shows how much humans can grow, how much they can change, even after facing something so dark.
But forgiving someone doesn't make the pain go away, does it? Or the loss. How do you balance wanting justice with understanding that the person who hurt you might be a product of their own rough past?
That's the complicated part of this whole story. The episode admits that understanding why someone does something doesn't make it okay. Sel's childhood was tough, full of abuse and neglect. Maybe that explains some things, but it doesn't change the fact that he committed terrible crimes.
And then there's the fact that Sells was sentenced to death, executed back in 2014. I can't imagine what that news must have been like for Crystal and the families of his other victims.
Yeah, the episode leaves you thinking about that. Did Sel's execution give them closure? Or did it just rip open old wounds? How do you cope with the emotions around the death of someone who caused so much pain? It's hard to say.
It's difficult to imagine all the things Crystal must felt. On the one hand, justice was served. But on the other hand, no punishment can change what happened or bring back the people who were lost.
That's what makes Crystal's story so powerful. It makes you think about tough questions like justice, forgiveness, the incredible ability humans have to find meaning and resilience in the face of unimaginable suffering.
And it reminds us that while we tend to focus on the person who did it and the person who was hurt, there are so many others affected, the investigators, the lawyers, the jury, even the reporters covering the story.
You're right. The episode talks about the impact these cases have on everyone, like ripples spreading out from the crime itself, leaving a mark on anyone they touch.
Like the detective who still drives past the Harris home all these years later, still haunted by what happened that night. It really highlights the burden these people carry, the scars they have that you can't see.
Exactly. And it shows how important it is to be more aware, to support the people who dedicate their lives to getting justice and helping survivors heal.
So we've looked at Crystal's trauma, her amazing resilience, her ability to forgive, even complicated feelings around the execution of her attacker. What does it all mean? What are we left with after this deep dive into Crystal's story?
I think for me, Crystal's story really shows just how strong the human spirit can be. Not just to survive terrible things, but to come out of them even stronger, more caring, and yeah, even more forgiving.
It's almost like she turned all that pain into something good, something that helped her not just to survive, but to really thrive.
It really makes you think, you know? It reminds us that even when things seem impossible, we have this strength inside us that can help us through those dark times, and we come out changed on the other side.
It's amazing the resilience people have, finding hope and healing after something so awful.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder what makes some people so resilient. Is it just part of who they are, or can you learn to be that way? How much does having good people around you matter when it comes to dealing with trauma? Crystal's story makes us think about these things.
It also makes me think about forgiveness. People often talk about it like it's this big thing, like you're saying what someone did was okay. But for Crystal, it feels different, more like a slow process of letting go of the anger and bitterness that were eating away at her.
You're so right. Real forgiveness, like what Crystal shows us, is something that happens inside you. It's a journey where you learn about yourself and break free from the past so you can be happy again.
It's not about saying it was okay, but about freeing yourself from carrying all that pain and anger.
Exactly. And that message is so powerful for anyone who's been through something awful. It says that you can heal even if the person who hurt you never gets punished or admits what they did.
So looking back at Crystal Searle's story, we're left with this feeling of awe at how strong she is, deep sadness for her friend Katie who was killed, and a new understanding of just how complicated trauma, healing, and forgiveness really are.
It's one of those stories that sticks with you, you know? Makes you think about the strength of the human spirit and how we all have the potential to overcome even the worst things that happen to us.
And maybe the most important thing is that it gives us hope. It reminds us that even when things are really bad, people can still be strong, find meaning, and choose to heal and grow.
Crystal's story is like a shining light, showing us the strength people have and how much they can overcome. It makes us want to look inside ourselves, build our own resilience, and be there for others who might be fighting their own battles that we can't see.
Well, that's it for our deep dive today, folks. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and more information on the case. And as always, thanks for listening.